so much for joining in. We've taken away the live element of the podcast this week, just because I was trying to figure some stuff out, especially as you can see with the background. Hopefully we have a little bit of higher quality stuff going on. But you are listening to Not My People's Podcast. My name is Daniel, and we are in week 2 of author reads for my new book, The House That Stands. There it is. If you want to go back and watch the last video, I encourage that you do that. We made it all the way to 1.4. I was dosed with the cold. I'm still kind of getting over it. But we're going to continue on from 1.5. And then if you guys have any questions, you can go ahead and pop it in the comments below. And then I will try to answer those questions next week. So that's sort of the trade-off of not having a live show this week or in the foreseeable future. And we'll see how this one goes as well. So we're continuing with 1.5, communicating. If the world we live in was created for the purpose of intersol communion, then the whole point of every life is to communicate effectively. Some would argue that it is simply to know. But if the point of life is to know the ultimate knowledge, then once I know that knowledge, my job is done, and I have no incentive to communicate it. My purpose is met with a dead end. If my purpose, however, is to communicate effectively, then my job is never done seeking the ultimate knowledge and communicating it to the world. We can know or think we know many things in isolation, and fail to communicate that knowledge effectively, and therefore fail in our purpose. I can know there is a God and tremble, but not commune and be one with him. The God who created the universe for intersol communion desires communion with our souls, and desires that we would have communion with one another. The content of that communion is where everyone differs. What information could I learn apart from which nothing else makes sense? And by extension, what message should I devote my life to communicating effectively to as wide and diverse a group as possible? These are worthy questions to pursue in our infancy. In our infancy, we must learn to communicate to survive. And now we must become fluent in the best news ever, how to communicate it and how it applies to our lives. 1.6, nonsense to our neighbors. We need to make some difficult connections when it comes to what we do and say on a day-to-day basis, according to our newfound purpose in life. Our purpose is not a new action, a new career, the care of a specific type of person, or a resolution to start or stop anything, but a renewed passion and purpose to communicate, to be seen, felt, heard, and understood, and to see, feel, hear, and understand a wide variety of people from a wide variety of backgrounds, and to derive value from one another in such a way as to sustain one another by fulfilling our mutual life's purpose. If the whole point of life is intersol communication, then the stuff of life takes a backseat to accurately and effectively communicating ourselves and our message to one another. In order for this to happen, the message must be our own and cannot be talking points from some institution or symbiotic organization to which we belong. Otherwise, we put a secondary interface between our senses and theirs and end up speaking nonsense to our neighbors because they don't know how to read love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control from the big red signs we are holding that say abortion is murder, or God hates fags, or don't you see I just finished mopping the floor? Get the out. My question is to help us make these connections. Or my question to help us make these connections will always be to ask, what is the point of life? If I am thrown into a tailspin because I cannot control a situation or an outcome or footfall on my newly cleaned floor, then I perhaps have not fully believed that the point of life is to communicate the best news ever. If I did, I would be more diplomatic and put my best foot forward. I would make a concerted effort to be crystal clear in every instance and act and speak in a way that shows my primary interfacial care and concern for people communicated directly to them, soul to soul. Let me be clear here. The point of life is not to be the adult, or to have clean floors, or to be necessarily right, but to communicate. If I am convinced that I alone am right, then my goal is not to communicate, but to dictate as the God of my area. It is a subtle difference with massive outcomes. I can communicate who I am, what I believe, without dictating to others, when I fully receive who they are and what they believe, and interface with them in a meaningful way, moving the conversation forward without the use of what the Apostle Paul calls well thought out arguments. The point of life is not to control people, but to love them and serve them by the communication of the best news ever until they believe it. Not only by our understandable language, but by our adjoining actions of love towards them, because we have communicated nothing but Christ and Him crucified. This is not only in terms of witnessing to the lost, but to one another. We can deny Christ by denying our purpose to communicate the love and mercy of Christ in our day-to-day interactions. The goal is not only that we would love and serve others and offer them the mercy of God which we ourselves received, but for them to love and serve us and others around them and offer them the mercy that they received. This can only be done when we are not speaking nonsense to our neighbors. 1.7. If you can't say something nice. It can be tempting, when not wanting to speak nonsense to our neighbors, to swing the other direction and rock away on our front porch and say nothing to disconnect from the conversation altogether. It is true that there are some conversations that are best to hold for another time, perhaps when both participants have matured a bit more. Remember, however, that the point of life is to communicate. So, giving the cold shoulder because of a known disagreement, even in the case of what seems to be a vitally important conversation, is puerile, in direct conflict with our life's purpose, and ultimately putting too much down on one horse. Our go-to wisdom generally comes from Thumper the Hare's curiously absent father. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all, Mr. Hare. I would amend his statement to say, if you can't say something nice, say something altogether different. Keep the conversation congenial. Don't let your pride get in the way of your mutual life's purpose of repairing the primary interface enough to communicate the best news ever. If you have to share an uncomfortable truth about what you believe, take a long time to give the truth its proper context, laying the foundational work of relationship first. Remember that it isn't our job to convince anyone of anything, but to communicate plenty. We may not have all of the answers, and indeed may be wrong on a few of the finer points, as we often are, when speaking out of our blessed assurance, but remember that the point isn't to be seen as right and the absolute authority on all occasions. The point is to communicate the love and mercy of Christ. These instructions will be nonsense to those who are united in enmity, who think that all things are fair in love and war, and that the only people who are with you are those who have allied against the same enemies. The life purpose of communication does not tolerate enmity as the source of unity. All enmity with our fellow humans and with God must be done away with, and the primary source of unity be the love and mercy of Christ. 1.8. Intersol Communication. Human flourishing is an objective end goal. Everyone wants to flourish in their own way, and ultimately we all agree about what flourishing looks like. When we consider the abstract objective of human flourishing, however, we do not consider that there are ends greater than my individual flourishing, even if it also contributes to the so-called flourishing of the wider community. We will see that this kind of flourishing is always at the expense of our own humanity and the humanity of those least valued by the community. With the option of flourishing or communicating, I would much rather communicate. Indeed, it is the example we received in Christ, Jesus, the great teacher. We must reclaim Jesus' example as the greatest communicator who ever lived. Consider that if Jesus was flourishing by anyone's standards in heaven, then, by comparison, he most certainly was not flourishing on earth. He gave up that which caused him to flourish, face-to-face communion with himself, not to ensure the flourishing of those around him. Indeed, his closest followers were put to death for his sake, just as he prophesied. He gave up that flourishing to reestablish the primary interface between the Father and his children. In the course of reestablishing this connection, Jesus demonstrated how to reestablish the primary interface with one another, which resulted in human flourishing. By their faith, they walked and saw and spoke and were healed and ate. Jesus did not set up a secondary organization to do this for him, or shotgun heal or instantly feed a whole crowd. He did it personally, one by one, in order to communicate through and repair the primary interface. When he had repaired his disciples sufficiently, he gave them the Holy Spirit to do the same things, and they went and personally did the work that Jesus was also doing. This, I believe, is what Jesus meant when just before he was about to die, he prophesied, "Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will he do, because I am going to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it." John 14:12-14. When Jesus reestablished the people of God, it was a community of people who were doing exactly this. They were doing the same work and a greater work by Jesus' own estimation of reestablishing people's communion with God and with one another. Of reestablishing people's communion with God and with one another, they were doing a greater work than Jesus was able to accomplish in his brief time with us. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded. We begin to fail this vision when we institutionalized the people of God, and symbiotic organizations grew up and took over in the form of the church. We traded direct intersol communication, resulting in human flourishing, for indirect flourishing. We considered that if flourishing is the direct end of all things, then people don't need to be communicated to. They need to see and hear and speak and eat and flourish in every way possible, and in as efficient a way as possible. This resulted in a sit down, shut up and listen to your Bible story, and then line up and get your gruel and sit back down message being communicated by the secondary interface. By neglecting to continue Jesus' work of personally repairing the primary interface and establishing reconciliation with God and other people, we also neglect the work of seeking human flourishing. 1.9. Conditions for flourishing. People do not flourish unless they are effectively communicating with God and with one another. And this cannot happen unless we shed our secondary interfaces and communicate with people through the primary interface. People are the primary interface for intersol communication. If I interact with anyone on the basis of my acting on behalf of anyone else or being over them in any capacity, be they my children, my employees, or as a public servant, and not as an interpersonal interaction, then I act upon them in an impersonal manner. If I am impersonal, then I have communicated that it is better to forego both my humanity and yours in the pursuit of our collective abstract flourishing than to take the time to repair the breach and temporarily sacrifice my own flourishing in pursuit of reestablishing communication with people as part of the primary interface. This will result in far greater and more widespread human flourishing than the impersonal seeking after collective flourishing via a secondary interface. 1.10. Communicate and flourish. It is not consistent with the Christian faith that we should seek flourishing through secondary interfacial institutions at the expense of our humanity, but rather that we should seek to reestablish the primary interface of soul-to-soul care and communication, resulting in human flourishing according to Christ, our example. If our main individual pursuit and purpose in this life is to commune with God and with one another, then we cannot effectively run after those pursuits if we continually outsource that responsibility to those we think can do a better, more efficient job. We will fail at both our own flourishing and the flourishing of others if we fail at personal intersol communication. We will not effectively communicate our love and mercy, nor the love and mercy of God, if our foundations feed 1 billion people in the third world next year. This is not because God doesn't want us to feed 1 billion people in the third world, but because we were not the ones to do it. We had a plan B. We didn't give our last mite to do it, and ultimately those people are so far removed from us that we think we achieved our purpose when really we met a dead end. World hunger would be over tomorrow if those who were hungry helped feed one another. This is because the world is not divided into haves and have-nots, but into care and care-nots. If I gave up my flourishing in my food supply chain to help those around me who were hungry to eat, then I would be doing the work of removing secondary interfaces and repairing the primary interface between myself and those I help feed, and between them and God. I would learn their names and professions and call them to walk after me, not for the purpose of collectively filling our bellies and flourishing in that capacity, but to learn to repair the communication lines between God and ourselves, that we would live as one with God and with one another as God is one with himself. 1.11, repairing the interface. The work of repairing the primary interface has often been referred to as building rapport, which can get a little lost in translation, as rapport tends to be the word used for a singular individual and does not carry with it the weight of our more familiar term, commonly used for larger groups of people, faith. People usually talk about how their faith in humanity has been lost and restored by either the great moral decay of a school shooting or the kindness of a block of neighbors who support both the victim's family and the perpetrator's family. When I talk about repairing the primary interface, this can only be done person to person. When a great number of people are in concert to repair the primary interface, each one must be an integral in-person part of the repair work, not just as a part of the group, but also, and most importantly, as an individual. There are many things in this life that we can outsource to other people to accomplish, but the work of repairing the primary interface is the one personal and irreplaceable responsibility in our lives that cannot be shirked or outsourced lest we fail to communicate the love and mercy of Christ. 1.12, free indeed. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." In the ramp up to his crucifixion, Jesus engages the Jewish leaders in a rather volatile exchange that nearly results in his stoning. Jesus is teaching in the temple, testifying about himself, saying that he is the light of the world, the Messiah, and says to those who believed in him that if they abide in the words he has just spoken about himself, then they are truly his disciples, and that they will know the truth, and the truth will set them free. The Jewish leaders take exception to the suggestion that they are not, in fact, free. They cite their political and heritage status as proof of their freedom, but Jesus maintains that those who practice sin are not free, but are enslaved to sin and walk in darkness. Jesus cites their hatred of him and desire to put him to death as proof that they walk in the footsteps of their murderous father and are indeed the offspring of the devil. This is what moves the elders to take up stones, but Jesus disappears into the crowd to avoid death before his time. And we're going to stop there. We still have 1.13 and 14, 15, 16, and 16 until we get into part 2. And so I think that's enough for tonight. But thank you very much for joining me. If you have any questions about what you've just heard, I encourage you to leave a comment down in the comments, and I will try to get back to you either by replying to your comment, or we'll address it in this format the next time I get to speak, which will probably be about another week or so. So thank you very much for joining me.